You know, for decades, the way we've understood big economic shocks, it's always been after the fact. A crisis hits, and then months, sometimes even years later, the data finally shows up and tells us what went wrong. But what if we could see the storm gathering before it actually breaks? Well, it turns out a new kind of AI is giving us exactly that, an algorithmic watchtower that can see economic chaos unfolding in real time.
In this quote right here, it just hits the nail on the head. For so long, economic analysis has felt like driving a car while only looking in the rearview mirror. I mean, sure, you can see the wreckage you just passed, but you have absolutely no idea what's coming up around the next curve. And that's been the standard for decades. It's a model that's just dangerously out of date in the world we live in today.
And look, the difference here is it's just night and day. On the one hand, you've got the old way, traditional analysis. It's slow, it's working with old data, and it's always reactive. But on the other hand, you have algorithmic foresight. It's lightning fast, it's using real-time data, and its whole purpose is to be predictive. This isn't just a small step up, it's a complete shift from reacting to ruins to actually anticipating the ripples.
So this really gets us to the core of the problem, what you could call the economist's blind spot. In an age where information moves at the speed of light and global events happen in a flash, the old tools of the trade, they're just too slow. And that leaves all of us pretty vulnerable. So, why is this lag so dangerous? Well, think about it. The big numbers we all wait for, like GDP, they only get updated every 3 months. Trade data can be even further behind schedule. So if a huge conflict shuts down a major shipping lane today, policymakers might not see the full statistical impact for an entire season. In a fast-moving crisis, that is an eternity. The information is always looking backward, never forward.
Okay, but this is where that new algorithmic watchtower comes into play. This is what's shifting the entire game from reacting to predicting, and it's all thanks to the revolution in machine learning. We're talking about a whole new way of seeing the global economy.
And this is the absolute key here. Machine learning gives us the visibility we've been desperate for. It lets us map out how a shock in one tiny part of the world, say the Middle East, is going to send these ripple effects through the entire global system. It shows us where the stress points are, and crucially, where things are most likely to break.
All right, so the big question is, how does this tech actually work? I mean, how does an algorithm see a crisis as it's happening? Well, it all starts with the most critical first step, sensing the world through a completely new type of data.
The fuel for this whole predictive engine is something called alternative data. And basically, this is everything that isn't an official government report. Think of it like the raw, messy, real-time pulse of the global economy. It gives us a snapshot of what's happening right this second, not what happened 3 months ago.
So how does it actually sense the world? Well, it's this really cool three-pronged approach. First, AI uses geospatial intelligence to physically watch the movement of oil tankers and cargo ships. Second, it analyzes satellite data of nightlights. Are the lights on in an industrial park? Or are they suddenly dimming? That tells a huge story about the economy on the ground. And finally, it uses natural language processing to scan millions of news reports, not just for facts, but for subtle shifts in tone and sentiment.
Now, after gathering all this raw, chaotic data, the AI's next job is to make sense of it all. It uses a technique called network analysis, which basically maps the entire global economy as this giant interconnected web. And by doing that, it can pinpoint exactly which countries, which industries, even which banks are the most exposed if something goes wrong in one specific spot.
Okay, so this is where it gets really cool, because it's one thing to see a storm coming, but it's a whole other ballgame to be able to track its path and predict its impact. Let's look at how this algorithmic foresight is actually being put to work in the real world.
We're going to dive into 3 amazing examples: how AI is helping to stabilize energy markets, how it's untangling our global supply chains, and how it can flag the invisible spread of financial risk from one country to another.
All right, let's start with energy. We all know oil prices are incredibly sensitive to geopolitical shocks. So instead of just waiting for the market to panic, machine learning algorithms can run thousands of dynamic simulations on the fly. They're pulling in live data on inventory levels, shipping logistics, and supplier capacity to figure out a new, stable price for oil almost instantly.
And what's just wild is how this AI can measure something as abstract as fear. It's like taking the economy's blood pressure. It analyzes options trading to put a number on what's called the volatility risk premia. And that's basically just a fancy term for the market's fear factor. It's a score that shows us how much everyone is bracing for the worst-case scenario.
Okay, next up, let's talk about supply chains. When a critical choke point like the Suez Canal gets blocked, the disruption can spiral out globally. This is where AI helps fight back against something called the bullwhip effect.
The bullwhip effect is a classic problem. Just imagine there's a small jump in demand for a product, so retailers overorder just a little to be safe. Then wholesalers see that and overorder even more. Pretty soon, the manufacturers at the end of the line are massively overproducing. AI helps stop this chain reaction by analyzing all the data and filtering out what's real demand versus what's just panic ordering.
And finally, application number 3, tracking financial contagion. Risk doesn't just spread through oil prices or shipping containers. It can also spread through these invisible threads of international debt. AI keeps an eye on this using live geopolitical risk indices, which act like a very early warning system for financial trouble.
So you can literally watch the chain reaction play out here. It might start with something really subtle, like a shift in diplomatic language that the AI picks up. That triggers a change in the geopolitical risk score, which signals to investors that it might be time to pull back. That leads to capital flight, which exposes a country's debt, and boom, the world gets an early warning that financial contagion is about to spread.
So we've seen how AI can basically predict and track a crisis in real time, which is incredible. But, the goal here isn't just to be a better spectator. The real point is to start building a more proactive and more resilient global system. And this, really, is the end game. The ultimate goal is to move beyond just tracking damage and start actively measuring strength. The AI can analyze a country's energy grids, its financial reserves, its economic diversity, and assign it a resilience score, a clear, simple metric of how well it can absorb and bounce back from a major shock.
Just imagine being able to see, clearly and objectively, which nations are strong and which are fragile before a crisis ever hits. A high score for Nation A could mean it has diverse energy sources. A low score for Nation C might flag a critical vulnerability that needs fixing. That's what being proactive is all about.
And get this, the watchtower doesn't just clock off once the storm passes. It keeps monitoring the recovery. By tracking the return of those satellite night lights and watching for ships moving in and out of ports again, it can signal to the whole world that the worst is over and the rebuilding has started.
And this is really just the beginning. The precision of these systems is only going to get better. Imagine integrating infrared data to actually monitor industrial heat signatures, or using blockchain to have a perfectly transparent view of our supply chains. We are right on the cusp of having a crystal clear view of the global economic machine.
And all of this, it leaves us with one massive lingering question. For the first time in human history, we're developing the ability to see economic disasters forming on the horizon. The technology is giving us foresight. But foresight alone isn't enough. Now that we can actually see the chaos coming, the real question is, what are we going to do about it?